So let's talk about purpose and why. In your own words, what do you feel like purpose/why means in somebody's life?
So the word purpose used to annoy the hell out of me. I went to a religious school and I thought it was kind of like a religious moment where it was like a bolt from the blue, where some people were struck by this thunderbolt of meaning and the rest of us were just left to wallow in nihilism. And and then I realized actually it wasn't that, that in fact there's no elitist aspect to purpose at all. Actually, we all have potentially a purpose, and it's not necessarily about saving thousands of lives or being Mother Teresa at all. It's a far more personal journey. Mm-hmm. So what I realized, and you and I were talking ahead of this call too, Andy, about, and it's not just following your joy, because that would be too easy, wouldn't it? So it's not going to the place that we expect, which is, the positive place. So what purpose speaks to is really starting to understand what it is that terrifies us about ourselves, that very few of us confront, and going there to find the answers. So the place that you least expect, and from that place that we don't want to visit, because it requires courage. It is like a quest. It has the feeling of a quest to it, like a hero's journey.
Hello and welcome to the Generate Your Value podcast. I'm your co-host, Andy McDowell, founder and owner of Generate Your Value, providing self-leadership, leadership, and business coaching services for corporate executives and business owners.
And I'm Zach Levy, your other co-host. I run a nationwide financial service business with my wife, Megan.
Together, Zach and I have the intention to bring you tips, concepts, ideas, suggestions, stories, and analogies from A to Z, which will help you to grow your personal brand and leadership skills in such a way that joy, happiness, and success, as you define it for yourself, are achieved.
We hope to use our gifts, talents, and experiences in business and leadership to generate value in your life. And with that being said, let's move to our topic for today.
Hello and welcome to the Generate Your Value podcast. My name is Andy McDowell, one of your co-hosts, and my partner in crime, Zach Levy, will not be joining us in this episode today, but our focus on our episode today is a very small word. It's only 3 letters, and that word is why. And I think the word why gets a little misused, a little abused, when it comes to the personal development industry. And so I'm going to bring in an expert today to kind of help us get the weed out of the chaff, as you might say, in terms of the word why and its impact on people's lives. So my guest today is Miss Janet Hogan. She's all the way over on the other side of the world in Bali, Indonesia, and she's a kindred spirit because she helps executives and senior leaders like I do sort of push through their blockages, figure out why it is that their leadership is not being as effective as it could be. So she's a kindred spirit from that perspective. So to get us started, let me read her bio and then we'll bring in Janet and have a wonderful conversation. So Janet's a 6-time entrepreneur. She has ground-up experience establishing a wide range of businesses, from award-winning restaurants, wedding venues, to multi-million-dollar real estate developments. And her probably biggest effort, if you will, as an entrepreneur was in partnership with her partner Ralph in developing from scratch an ad agency where they spent 20 years developing that business. But at the age of 45, she felt like she had everything in her life, but felt totally empty. And how many times have you heard me talk about this on the podcast, about being and doing? So Janet did a lot of doing, right? 6-time entrepreneurs, that's a lot of doing, but she felt totally empty out of it. And then 2 events in her life kind of pushed her to start focus on her being. And that was the 2008 financial crisis and a near-death experience, which I'm going to let her get into the details of that. Gave her that nudge to start looking at her life from a being perspective instead of doing. So today we're going to talk to her about her groundbreaking work in personal development, where her greatest passion lies in helping business leaders break through their barriers to realize their vision and create positive change and generate their value in the world. So Janet, welcome to the podcast. Can't thank you enough for taking your time to come spend it with us, particularly since our time zones are what? 12 or 13 time zones away.
Yeah.
It's my morning, it's your evening, the end of your workday.
Yeah, if I suddenly collapse and disappear, you'll know the fatigue is caught up. No, I'm good.
Right.
I'm delighted to be here, Andy. Thank you.
So I'm going to let you fill in the gaps. That's sort of in aviation language, that's the 100,000 foot level about your life story. But maybe you could talk a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey. You know, what was driving you in looking at 6 different businesses, what that evolution was like, and what it felt like for you to get to the end and just, as you stated in your own words, feel emptiness inside.
Yeah. Look, like so many of us, maybe all of us, the big carrot was money, of course. And it was carrots on steroids in the 80s because, you know, that was the greed is good era. You and I are about the same age, aren't you, Andy? So you know what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. And it was almost seen as a noble pursuit just to follow the money carrot, which we did very successfully. But the weird thing is just as our businesses were starting to do really well, we jumped from that business to another business. Almost in a kind of schizophrenic way. And I realize in hindsight that part of that was I was in business with my husband, and a lot of people say, how on earth did you stay married during all that time? But we're probably complementary opposites. But I realize that sometimes we can bring our unresolved issues, well, not sometimes, all the time, we can bring our unresolved issues into our work. And so there was abandonment trauma there on my husband's side. So we had an abandonment pattern where just as the business was starting to look really promising, we'd drop it in favor of something else. The equivalent of bright, shiny object syndrome. Mm-hmm. But despite ourselves, we were successful and we turned over lots and lots of money. And I did get to that point where I had, everything I thought I wanted. And this was the real confrontation for me, because I still remember the day I was sitting in this kayak with my daughter Clover. She was 8. And I was just surveying everything that we created. It was literally a Richard Branson-style luxury lifestyle in the tropics with palm trees framing the house, private beach next door, aqua seas lapping it out at our footsteps. And looking at all of this and going, this is the moment. This is the moment where you go, we made it. And this was the very moment where I experienced a kind of depressive void that so many people talk about. And it was almost like a paradox. What do you do with that feeling? And also, how do you talk to anyone about it? Because I would sound, to use an Australian term, like a total wanker to start complaining about my luxury lifestyle. So there was guilt about not being more grateful. So of course I did nothing with it. And I remember it was a Sunday, so I just went, I know, I'll do what I always do. I'll sit at my desk and do some work, like you do on a Sunday when you're a workaholic. And because I didn't do anything, I feel there was a divine intervention the next year, which was 2008. And basically everything that we'd spent the last 30 years working so hard for was ripped out from under us. And because my identity was tied up so much in the number of zeros in our bank account, it was like I became a big zero as we lost everything, to the point where I just wanted to check out because I didn't know who I was and I didn't have any sense of identity, and I just felt like a hollow person. And I remember wheeling around the garden at 2 a.m, everything was like monotone, all the colour drained out of everything, it was a full moon, and I then went up to my husband and I just shook him by the shoulder and I said, I can't do this anymore. And fortunately he said, listen, we're going to get through this together, which we did, but that didn't really answer any questions for me. So at that point I had to throw everything that I'd believed away and start afresh. And that's a scary place to be when you're terrified that if you take any look within, you're going to find nothing there. You know, I've been such a good model of running away from myself for most of my life that it became almost unthinkable to stop and pause and look within. Horror of horrors, you know, what if I don't like myself, or what if there's nothing there? So where it did lead to was lots of seminars and workshops that promised a lot but didn't really seem to deliver anything. My advertising self said, this is bullshit. All these programs promising transformational change, yet so few seem to deliver. And there doesn't seem to be any accountability. So, you know, the business person in me said, you have to be accountable. If you're going to charge people money for something, you have to deliver an outcome. Mm-hmm. So there was that kind of slight dismay and then growing skepticism about the whole industry, until I went to a Face Your Fears boot camp where I did get a life-changing moment, and that was where we were asked to submit ourselves to a person who would walk up to us, squeeze our carotid arteries until we passed out. And so this guy came up, he looked like someone out of the Hells Angels, squeezed my neck. And because it was such a controlled environment, I wasn't too concerned, I wasn't scared, but I was curious. I thought, oh, I've heard so much about people seeing the light at the end of the tunnel that I thought maybe that would happen to me. And instead, what I felt as I was passing out was this, it was like a tsunami of disappointment. It was like a tidal wave took over. And in that moment, it must have been just a split-second realization. It was, so this is what I would have felt had it been my actual death. This is the judgment day summation of my life. Janet, you've let everyone down. And so when I came to, it was with a huge tidal wave of disappointment, like I was just sobbing. And then the next point after that was self-righteous anger. You know, how dare that be the summation of my entire life? You know, me who sacrificed everything, the noble woman, mother, tireless worker, self-sacrificial wife, etc. And then there was an aha moment of course, I've let everyone down, and no one more so than myself. Because in denying the world who I was, and I say this about myself, but I feel it applies to all of us, in denying myself that, in denying the world my gift, which I had no idea what that was, but there was a sense of I'd kept something buried, I'd squandered something that I'd been given, that this act of selflessness that was my life was actually the supreme act of selfishness. And so that led me on to, okay, we've got to find out what this thing called purpose is, because there's something there, I don't get it, money was not my calling, so what the hell is?
Yeah, you felt like your skills and talents was in money making, right? In business unto itself, with no introspection to say or discover what other skills or talents you might have.
Yeah, and would it be possible to have a business that you didn't want to keep running away from? That was the other thing. Mm-hmm. What is that thread in some businesses, in some endeavors, some people call it vocation, that keeps us there hanging in throughout all the ups and downs? Why is it that some people persevere, and then there are other people like us up to that point who just gave in as soon as it got a little bit hard and did something else just because we could? So that became a question.
Well, I think with abandonment, you were kind of abandoning the business before the business had the opportunity to abandon you. From a straight business perspective, and then something came along that was bigger than your business that kind of forced the issue.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the business becomes irrelevant. It might be a vehicle for getting this thing out there, or it might be something else. So, yeah.
So let's talk about purpose and why. In your own words, what do you feel like purpose/why means in somebody's life?
So the word purpose used to annoy the hell out of me. I went to a religious school, and I thought it was kind of like a religious moment where it was like a bolt from the blue, where some people were struck by this thunderbolt of meaning, and the rest of us were just left to wallow in nihilism. And and then I realized actually it wasn't that. That in fact there's no elitist aspect to purpose at all. Actually, we all have potentially a purpose, and it's not necessarily about saving thousands of lives or being Mother Teresa at all. It's a far more personal journey. Mm-hmm. So what I realized, and you and I were talking ahead of this call too, Andy, about, and it's not just following your joy, because that would be too easy, wouldn't it? So it's not going to the place that we expect, which is, the positive place. So what purpose speaks to is really starting to understand what it is that terrifies us about ourselves, that very few of us confront, and going there to find the answers. So the place that you least expect, and from that place that we don't want to visit, because it requires courage. It is like a quest. It has the feeling of a quest to it, like a hero's journey. And if we can come out the other side, we bring with us that elixir, which is the healed self. And when we put that out into the world, it's only normal that when we feel whole and healed, that we're going to want the same for others somehow. That's the natural pathway. And that's what I would call, and I know my husband hates this term, but being in service to others. So what it means really is that it's no longer about you. We're not self-obsessed. However, we're doing something that is supremely or nobly selfish in that it lights us up. It must, otherwise we wouldn't persevere. So it's about going within and finding that part of us that we don't want to own, which I call the shadow self, but I think the shadow's probably not very well understood.
Yeah, but I think a great analogy for this is you have somebody that lives in a particular area, let's call it a wooded area, and is kind of doing their own hero journey in getting to know the lay of the land, right? Is exploring around, has good days and bad days relative to exploring, but has this experience in the area. And in an effort to serve others, they're going to use the experience that they have from exploring in this area. And I know this is kind of a simplified analogy, but they can now act as a guide for others that are going to experience that same hero's journey, or that journey through the shadow side, through the traumas, or whatever it is that they're looking for, total healing as well as finding the authentic self.
Yeah, it's going to be a continuation of what we've experienced and what others are experiencing. Let's say it's pain, suffering, and identifying that in others, and so our salve, if you like, is helping others heal that. And all of this might sound very metaphysical, but it can show up in all sorts of different ways. But I think the way to make sense of it is to understand what drives it in the first place. So let's just say that we all have our own brand of pain. You know, we have a particular pain point, and normally we can find that from our childhood, and it's usually also played out, it's rippled out in most of our adult life for most of us. And so if we can understand what that type of pain is and put a name to it, that gives us a clue. So, for example, I spend my time as a human doing on steroids, running 6 businesses, thinking that money was the god, and in the process losing my identity. So I remember one of these workshops that I attended, and the fellow facilitating said, okay, your job is to tell the audience the last thing you want to share with them, the last thing you want them to know about you. And it was very spontaneous. And so I just said to the audience, I've spent the last 30 years of myself buried alive, and then just melted on the spot as the reality of that actually hit me, because I hadn't even thought about that before. It just came up. Mm-hmm. And so if I wanted to say, okay, well, what type of pain do I call that? I would call that the pain of self-betrayal. And so that is the dagger in the heart for me. But I think we all have our own brand of dagger in the heart. And so if we want to find our purpose, then the first place to look is at that pain point. Usually shows up in the heart. If we go into our body, we usually feel it around there, or the stomach, and start to do an inward journey into the self from there to see, well, what does that reveal?
Yeah, you and I both have had similar journeys from the perspective that we discovered our why out of that pain. You know, your pain was in all the doing, being buried alive, as you say. For me, it's been a self-esteem, a self-worthiness, and it came out of the pain of a divorce that started that journey of healing for me, realizing what it is that I brought into the marriage from that perspective, and finally looking deep inside, saying you got to own it. And if you want a better life for yourself, you need to own it and go heal it.
Yeah.
And it's not to say, 40 years later, I'm 100% healed, but I'm a long way down the path.
Yeah.
From that perspective, because it is a journey through the rest of your life.
And let's just say, Andy, that divorce was a symptom of something deeper. Mm-hmm. So the divorce was like the canary in the coal mine, going, okay, we have a problem, and now the pain point's got to a level where it's no longer tolerable, and that's where the change happens. And a lot of people say, do I have to have a crisis to have this, do I have to have this dark night of the soul? And maybe you don't have to have it, but if you do have it, it's almost impossible not to come through that. I mean, you have a choice, right? If you really are in that bleak place, that ground zero point, either you do check out physically, or something changes metaphysically, a belief or pattern of behavior that's seen you through life up to this point, but it's not serving you anymore. So there's a metaphysical death where you go, okay, I've got to start afresh, clean slate. Where do I go now? Who am I? And that's where I think we need a little bit of education to stop us running away from ourselves, and to stop us just going to the first numbing device, whether it's porn or alcohol or gambling or whatever it is. We've got to start turning around and confronting that. Maybe if I can share a story, Andy, that came from my childhood. And quite often when we're talking about purpose, we get clues from our childhood. Mm-hmm. In fact, as Steve Jobs would say, you start joining the dots retrospectively. It's easy in hindsight, and I think that's true. But there was a long-running show on TV back in the 60s called Lost in Space, and maybe some of the people listening will remember that. And every episode featured a particular monster, and that was the what made it so compelling for us kids watching it. The delight of being scared to death. But apparently, officially, the scariest monster of all, and definitely the one that gave me nightmares for a long, long time after watching that episode, was the mummy. And I think the terrifying thing about it was, talking about loss of identity, it was this creature which had no face. So you couldn't see into its eyes. And so I would have this recurring nightmare of this mummy figure that used to hang outside the spaceship of the family Robinson. So it was always there, a bit like a shadow, right? Always lurking, never coming inside the spaceship, but just always there. So I had this nightmare of this slow monster making this horrible groaning sound, scraping up our suburban driveway in our house in Sydney, and me waking up in my bed waiting for it to come and get me. And then I would actually get out of my bed, this is in my nightmare, walk out into the backyard and motion to the monster to come and sit down on our concrete steps outside the kitchen. And I remember thinking to myself, because you know how dreams can sometimes be a little bit lucid. You're kind of there as a witness and also there as a participant in the dream. And I remember thinking to myself, you're so gutless, Janet. I mean, you should just kill this monster. You know, otherwise it's going to kill you and your entire family. And instead I just sat down with it and started talking to it and saying, you know, wouldn't it be better if you didn't kill us? I mean, what's the point really? What are you going to get out of it? You know, suddenly we'll be dead. There'll be no one left to kill. And anyway, so I was thinking about this the other day and I thought, this is very similar to shadow work. So when confronted by the monster, we could just get up and run, or we could grab a knife and try and kill it, stab the mummy, or we could do what I did in my sequel to this dream, which was just sit with it, realize it's not going to hurt me, and then reaching out and actually putting my hand on its face and feeling that the texture of that cloth beneath my fingers, and then realizing as I did that some of those tightly wound bandages were starting to fall away and start to actually peel them and unpeel this monster, unwind the cloth. And as I did that, realizing there was no horrendous maggoty body inside, it was just shafts of light. And the more I peeled the cloth and it just sat there in a pile of rags, this light coming through. And the light, of course, ultimately, when we can confront our darkness like that, we realize it's part of us. The light enters us. It is us. And this monster that we've been running, this metaphorical monster that we've been spending our whole lifetime running away from, was just a part of us that we'd never fully owned. And that's the best way I can describe the shadow self. It's there actually to protect us, but we don't understand it. And it's only when we start to explore that shadow and realize it's an ally, it's not an enemy, and it's a part of us. And once we can find out what's behind that, that we can start to feel this sense of wholeness.
So do you think the shadow side is that inability to see ourselves as being 100% perfect, right? We understand we're not perfect human beings, but we want to be. And you all of a sudden start having shame and judgment, perfectionism comes into play, that stops us from A, being introspective, to look honestly at ourselves, and B, to realize that we have the light and the shadow within ourselves. Just like yin and yang, just like masculine, feminine energies and so forth. We have light and shadow that's inside of us. It's a naturally part of us, and it's not something to be afraid of. It's something actually to understand about ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. So how this works, the shadow, think of the shadow as an overactive part of us that is designed to keep us safe. And for some reason, in humans only, we seem to be the only species wired this way, we have such an overactive shadow. Think of how fear-based we are. You know, they say,
Yeah.
you know, 70% of our thoughts are fearful, negative thoughts. I mean, that's insane. Particularly if you think how many tens of thousands of thoughts that we have a day, you know, according to Dr. Joe Dispenza. So if that's true, that means that we are almost doomed to live in a fearful state, and the fear builds on itself and compounds, and we become more and more scared, more anxious, more depressed, however that shows up. So if we just start to think of the shadow as an overprotective device, maybe like it's supposed to be a seatbelt, but it's more like a straitjacket. And it is designed to keep us small, because the theory is if we go big, if we start to become big and seen and a person of influence, that equates to danger. And we might fall into harm's way. So far better that we stay small and live the mediocre life, and that way we'll be safe. And we'll probably only realize what a disaster that is when we draw that final breath, like I did. Oh, Janet, you've let everyone down. So what if that's not true? What if we're not supposed to live that small life of quiet despair? What if, in fact, we are supposed to be fun, joyful, silly people, just here to have fun? What if that was our ultimate purpose, to be able to live without fear? How cool would that be? So that's where we start coming to our why. If you like, the business word for our why would be a vision. Having a vision. What's our vision? The vision that's bigger than ourselves. So if I reference my own life, I would say my vision is was formed by a life of self-sacrifice, like so many of us. It's not just the woman's domain, it's men particularly. Men are so self-sacrificial as the breadwinner, and in the theatre of war, men will just throw themselves at bullets and become cannon fodder. So men know all about self-sacrifice. What if it wasn't supposed to be sacrificial? What if we were actually supposed to have fun? What if it wasn't supposed to be work and no play? What if we actually had a job that we enjoyed? And what if that occupation became like a preoccupation, the thing that pulls us out of bed in the morning? Why could that not be a possible scenario? And how cool would that be? Instead of, as we have it now, they estimate about 80% of the workforce actively hates what they're doing, and we spend most of our waking hours at work, so that strikes me as insane. And just, a minority of 20% of people actually profess to enjoy what they do. So what if we could flip those numbers around? And I feel that the secret to that is confronting ourselves, confronting that shadow self, and finding out what is it that's holding joy away from us. Mm-hmm. What is it that is saying we must sacrifice ourselves? It's not out there, it's in here. How do we unlock that?
Well, I often talk with my clients about, this episode's about that simple word called why, but there's two other simple words, and an or. Right? And so we like to live by the or. It's either me or you. Right? So I'm going to be self-sacrificing myself and my joy in order to be a great, to be the leader I think I'm supposed to be, or some requirement or perception of what life should be through what we were taught in our upbringing, or through religion, or some other things, that we don't take a step back and go, why can't it be the and? Why can't I be my authentic self and live a life that's fun and joy and be a tremendous leader? I don't have to be self-sacrificing in order to have impact and influence and be a very effective leader in whatever it is that I'm leading. A community, a business, a team within a business, a company, whatever it might be. And I think that's where people get stuck. They get stuck on the or instead of seeing the and.
Yeah, that's so true, Andy. And I'd love to talk about the process that you and I went through, just as a way of showing whoever's listening just how structured it is. Because the thing that really always perplexed me, and I know Simon Sinek really seemed to be the person who kick-started this conversation, when he had that seminal TED Talk, Start With Why. But what really perplexed me after that was, well, how? Where do we go for that? What does that mean? And I know Simon's advice was to, talk to a friend who knows you really well, but we're still externalizing if we do that. And how reliable is that? Mm-hmm. What are the chances that they're just going to pinpoint that thing that hasn't been expressed within you? So one of the things that I've noticed, and I include myself here, I remember having a business coach when we had a wedding business, which was one of our crazy businesses that we ran just because we could. And but we thought we'd get all professional about it and we'd hire a coach. And I remember the first question that he asked me, he said, "Janet, what do you want?" And this was when I had everything, right? And I just remember looking at the sheet of paper, the blank sheet of paper, and just getting really emotional, which was not like me. I was like a cold fish. And going, God, what's going on? I'm feeling this emotion. And also, I don't have a clue. I don't know what I want. And so that was the first inkling that there was something weird going on within me that needed to be unlocked. So I realized that people find it hard to nominate what they want, and they might go for the wrong thing. They might get into their head, not the feeling self, they'll get into the thinking self. So I thought, most people, however, know what they don't want. So what if we could compile a list of the things that we don't want? And it's not a list of obvious things like living in poverty or starving. They're the kind of, top level problems that confront us all the time. But how they manifest as emotional symptoms, what I would call pain points. And so I put together a list of what I felt were about 150 of the most common ones. And what if we could individually look at what are my 3 top pain points? Is it isolation? Is it loneliness? Is it self-sabotage? Is it depression? There are so many flavors to this. And everyone, I notice, has their own combination that's unique. And so what if we could name the pain, and from that then do the deep dive into the feeling self and find out what's behind that pain, because maybe that's the light that's waiting to be revealed.
Yeah, so for the listening audience, Janet, over her 10 years of doing this current business of coaching with the executives and leaders, has developed her own process that goes through the pain points, and she was nice enough to offer it to me to sit down scheduled for an hour, but it ended up going for an hour and a half of having myself go through the process to see what kind of outcomes that we got. So I thought it would be a great way to illustrate, to have me be the guinea pig here on the episode today, to talk about the process, what my outcomes were, and just kind of lift the lid on it a little bit so people can understand the impact this process can have on you.
Yeah. So I work with triangles mostly because I love them. You can't bend a triangle out of shape. It's a solid object. And also it's pretty easy to remember 3 things. I can remember 3 things. So we bring it down to 3, and I recall, Andy, when we funneled your 3 core pain points down to your top 3. So if you imagine a triangle, as you're listening to this, if you imagine a triangle, an upward facing triangle, and on the bottom left is the 3rd core pain point, and your one was worry, right? Worry. Stress. On the bottom left. And then we had stress on the bottom right. Yeah, that's right. And then at the top, we had inability to receive. So here's what I've noticed about working with triangles. It's really interesting. The thing that is the biggest issue for us tends to float to the top. Intuitively, we know what that is. It's just a word, of course, and words are not perfect, but they open up and they're like a key to a special portal. There's that expression, in the beginning was the word. Words can be really powerful. So let's just say that these words are just a key. And so how this tends to work is that whatever is at the top of the triangle tends to be brought about by the 2 aspects at the bottom. So in other words, we have, I would call this the shadow mission for you, Andy. And every one of our shadows has its own mission. It's how it keeps us small and stuck. And it sounds something like this. So through stress and worry, it was stress first, wasn't it? And then that causes the worry. Yeah. So through stress and worry, I create an inability to receive, or I am unable to receive. So it keeps us in a state where we're not open to receiving, and that kind of makes sense. So then,
it goes a step further, right? So through stress and worry, I'm unable to receive, and therefore I must do everything on my own.
Yes, that's right. So when we have an active, let's call it childhood wound within us, which is almost like everyone does, let's just say this is the human condition, then it evokes usually a sense of shame. There's usually shame attached to it. So imagine then that there was something that happened in your childhood, Andy, that caused you to experience shame, maybe for the first time, or the first time at least that you remember, that where it really made an impact. Do you recall that time when you were conscious of feeling shame?
Yeah, so I'm going to share a story I didn't share with you. So I had a multitude of experiences in my relationship with my dad where I had some kind of project to complete. Usually it was school. But the one I'm going to share today is one that wasn't in school. And a lot of it comes down to my dad kind of projecting on me his own lack of confidence in himself to do technical things. So I had an instance where I was in Cub Scouts. I'm not sure if you have Cub Scouts in Australia or not, but it's it's a group in the United States. It's the Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts, and you earn badges doing certain activities in an effort for you to learn and grow through experience. And one of the events Cub Scouts are known for is the Pinewood Derby. And what the Pinewood Derby is, every Cub Scout gets a kit. It's a block of wood and some wheels and some nails and some axles made out of wood, and you have to craft a little car out of these materials, and then you're going to race against other cars that the other Cub Scouts built. You know, so you have this track that's high at the top and it goes racing down the hill, and whoever gets there first wins, and you go race after race after race till you get a winner. I don't know, I was probably about 8-9 years old at the time, and I was fully expecting to work on it with my dad because it's going to involve hammers and saws and other things that you're told as a kid don't touch unless dad's around. So my dad didn't have a lot of confidence in his ability to work with tools, so he took it to work where people had those kinds of skills, and they not only put the car together, you had a weight limit on the car. They put the car on a scale and screwed screws in the bottom of it to try and get it as heavy as possible, right up on the line, with a thought that the more mass that you have, the faster it's going to go down the track. Yeah. So all I had to do was paint the thing. And like some other events you and I talked about, I came in second place. But I didn't feel like I put any work into it. It wasn't really my work.
Yeah.
Because 80-90% of it was done by somebody else. And it wasn't me, and it wasn't my dad. From that perspective. So just kind of lived with that shame and that judgment, that secret, if you will, that I hadn't really done the work, but yet I'm walking around with a little plastic trophy saying it came in second place.
Yeah. And that this leads us to the thought that underpins all of this. So in the same way that we have a core pain point that we can express as a word, we have what I call a core destructive belief. And I don't know what yours is, but it could be in that realm of, I can't do it on my own. It's usually an I am statement, but it could be in that area. Anything that feels like it's a ball, and it's like the M&M lolly. You know, there's the dark chocolate shame inside, and it comes in this waterproof wrapping of a thought that makes sense of the shame. Of course, I feel terrible because I can't do anything on my own, and then that sets off the overcompensating self, which might be something like, I must do everything on my own. I must live my life alone without a wife.
I want to prove that I can do it on my own.
Yeah, exactly. And so we get into this terrible territory of two false selves, the one that's attached to shame, almost inferiority, the one that's attached to superiority, and they kind of do endless battle with each other. I call it the pain pendulum. We swing between the two. And in that process, we totally bypass our core truth, which only has to just hang there. To be our true self requires no effort. It's hard work keeping shame alive. And it's hard work saying to yourself, I must do everything on my own. I mean, think about how that's played out and how that speaks to inability to receive. Am I able to receive help from others? No, because I have to do it on my own. And that's not a conscious thought. This is below the surface. We don't even know that that's going on. It's only when we start going here that we can bring all this stuff up. But while it's operating beneath the surface, it just feels like, why am I struggling? Why is life so hard? What happened to my marriage? And other aspects that we might have let go or sabotaged in some way.
So to continue on my process, we've identified the top 3 pain points, which then leads to what in your process?
So what that leads to is, firstly, so take the first one, which is stress. So what would you say, Andy, creates stress in your life? Typically, what would be a typical stressful situation for you?
Well, being a Virgo, it's perfectionism, right? So if I feel like I'm not doing it perfectly in some way, it starts creating stress.
Okay. So there's a process that we go here where we do a deep dive into what does that feel like in your body. Can you identify that as a pattern? Do you recognize this from another time in your life, going right back to that childhood? And let's say it took us to that childhood moment that you just shared, where this core destructive belief is created. So then what happens, it's a bit like that story of me sitting next to the mummy and talking to the shadow, the thing that terrified me, and realizing there was nothing to be scared of. It's like we have to have a coming back to the self. So little Andy, who is feeling so ashamed, and that's where the shadow starts to kick in and want to protect little Andy. And the adult self, and bringing the two together so that there's like a reconciliation within. So, that's how we start to heal that childhood wound. And when we get a sense of what it feels like for that childhood, that child who is still suffering within us. So that's why they say sometimes, we can be a grown-up person, but our behavior might reflect a 5-year-old when we get stressed. If we can start to reconcile and start to heal that wound, that feeling of, probably speaks to low self-worth. If I can't do it on my own, how worthy am I? If we can start to heal that and realize that all that was a response to something that happened to you. It had no reflection on your true value. But it's interesting now that you talk about value, because it's coming from, that's a good example of how purpose plays out. When you know the pain of lack of self-worth, then of course you want to explore your value and how you can bring value out in others. So when we start to heal that childhood wound, that's when we can start to see, well, what's behind stress? What's on the other side of stress that doesn't feel so heavy, where I don't have to be perfect and things are okay just as they are, flaws and all. And what feeling does that evoke in me? And I remember when we worked through this process, which I'm now just describing, so we're not actually doing it. What was at the back of that, as it turned out, was love. It was the energy of love was behind stress, which I can kind of understand too, because stress is when we stray away from our true self. Love, if that's the essence of who we are, that would make sense, that coming back to yourself evokes a feeling of love. So then we take that feeling of love and we apply it to the next thing on that triangle, worry. So when you're stressed, and Andy, typically what happens at that point? You feel stressed, something's not turning out the way you thought it would, or you've got so many things on your to-do list, you don't know how to do them all. What happens after that? what comes off that stress?
Well, it's worry that I'm not going to be able to find a solution or have a good outcome.
Okay. So then at that point we go through the same process. We go, okay, now what if we realize that stress is just like a symptom. It's not who you are, and that the part that it's suppressing is love. Okay, so now what happens when we take love and apply that to worry? What does that open up? What does that make possible within you? Because worry is blocking something that's within you. It's a barrier. So when we apply love to worry, what opens up at that point? What does that allow?
Well, it allows love to fuel creativity, right? There's no worry, and it's almost a freeing. It's a freedom.
Yeah.
It's a blank canvas that allows you to be fully creative, as you were born to be.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So now we're starting to change this triangle of darkness. Now we're starting to turn it into the triangle of light. Mm-hmm. So now at the base we have, through love and creativity, I create a world of. And so once you are opened up to what you love to do, and then you go, okay, how can I use this creatively? How can I what can I create now in this space? Then what happens to that inability to receive, where everything has to be done on your own? I must do everything on my own. What happens to that once you're starting to bring love and creativity into the space?
Well, as we talked about, it's about faith in others, right? Faith in the fact that if I be creative, and I'm creating something of value, or I feel like it's going to be of value in the world, then that's going to be received well by others, right? And some kind of exchange is going to happen.
Yeah.
But if I don't have that faith in others, that they're going to show up, recognize the value, and do an exchange, then what is this all about then?
Exactly. So as you start to really enjoy, so this is where we're talking about turning work into play, and bringing playfulness and silliness, into the space. So the more you do what you love, the less you're going to want to do what you don't love. And so at some point we have no choice but to start delegating. If you, like, what are some things that you really love doing, Andy? What lights you up?
Well, helping others to find their light. This is why what I do. But I also, the engineer in me loves the technology things. Like, for example, this podcast is going out on video now. First season that we're doing it. But that requires me to learn some new technologies to be able to do that. I spent this past weekend, learning these technologies. I was full of joy and creativity, learning this stuff and building stuff relative to be able to deliver this podcast in video now, let alone audio like we have for 3 seasons. And I was able to take a step back after the weekend going, that was a lot of fun. Because I was being creative. I was using technology to help create something that hopefully is going to be of value for some people. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So, and were you feeling stressed or worried while you were doing that?
No, I was having fun.
Yay. So at that point, we become nobly selfish and I want more of this. And so to be able to have more of this, we need to draw on others to do the stuff that we hate. And so this is where, instead of inability to receive, we are now entering the space of having faith in others. And just as a little side note on this, which is interesting, because we talk about the feminine and the masculine. So an inability to receive, and I see this in a lot of men, speaks to a suppressed feminine side. So and women can show up, like I personally have an overinflated masculine side as well. Like I have a challenge receiving also, so it's not just men. But what we're talking about, love and creativity, that's all the right brain stuff. That is the feminine energy. And so that seems to be where the world is starting to slowly shift towards, particularly in a world that's becoming facilitated by AI, which kind of takes care of all the logical left brain stuff more and more. And so if we are going to grow in any direction, it's probably going to be in the more intuitive areas where our creativity can flourish. So as much as people are talking about, oh, what's happening to the world, it's going to be a shit show while everything collapses, that might be true. However, I think on the other side of that, because we humans are so adaptable, what's going to emerge is a more creative space where it's almost expected that you use your creativity, ingenuity, imagination going forward, because the bots will have the rest of it looked after. And so what we're talking about here is almost like maybe this is, you know, the next stage for humanity to really start to embrace the feminine. I'm not talking about men becoming more female, by the way. It's not that. It's just the energy. Mm-hmm. And so this puts us, all of us, into a space of being able to receive and ultimately collaborate. So we're starting to work with each other, not against each other in competition. So now the whole flavour of society starts to shift to one that's more fun and playful.
Yeah, I recently wrote a LinkedIn post about more and more as we go down and AI becomes more popular, you cannot afford to not be creative in your life, because that's where the opportunity is going to lie, because computers can program logic. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what they were built for from that perspective. So that leaves creativity in the more feminine side, feminine energy side, is going to be where the opportunity is, regardless of your gender, to go out and add value to the world. Yeah,
that's right. This is not a gender story, it's an energy story, or a balance story, yep. Yin and yang, yeah. And it's so true, and that's so exciting. So despite all the fear that might be, you know, circulating at the moment, as we know that there's going to be a kind of a chaotic moment as systems break down, but maybe those systems weren't serving us anyway. That from that I think will emerge is a more bold, playful, courageous, fun, happy human. We certainly couldn't be a lot more miserable than we are at the moment. There are a lot of mental health issues which we're seeking external solutions for. So maybe there will be the day where we feel it's absolutely not only normal but mandatory to do shadow work and actually understand that dark side of us, because that's where all the light is.
So to kind of tie up this topic, so we came to an answer of faith in others is at the top of my triangle. Now, how does that relate to my why?
So, well, in a way, you're already practicing or expressing your why, say through this podcast, which is all about value. And I suppose if you're asking someone about what value means to them, it kind of implies that you already have a faith in others and that you want to see others succeed. Personally, on a personal level, what it means is more and more trusting of others to do the stuff that you don't want to do. And also, working more with others. So that opens up, that's like a flower, isn't it? That opens up all sorts of possibilities in relationships, friendships, working collaborations, joint ventures. It's saying partnership on all sorts of levels. So, I mean, that's pretty big. But I think possibly also as you are someone who just through this podcast is bringing people together through conversation. So in terms of your why, every time you bring someone, a fellow human, to a place where they can appreciate their value and start to heal that lack of self-worth, you are fulfilling your purpose because you are healing at the same time. And that ultimately is our why, to understand what causes our suffering, to help others suffer less accordingly in the same way. And as we do that, we heal ourselves. So it's like a benevolent loop.
Yeah, the way I like to look at it is I have total faith in myself. I've been through the journey. And
Yeah.
I have faith in others that they can go through that journey themselves if they want to. And I'm here as a guide and a coach to help you through that journey. So my faith in others is a faith that you have it in you to do this.
Yeah.
You just have to make that choice that you want that for yourself in your life.
And in your life as a coach, your success hinges on your belief in others. It really does. Because people sense when you believe in them. And when they can feel that you believe in them, then they will rise to the occasion. So
It makes them feel seen.
Yeah, exactly. And
Which is what we all want. To be
yeah,
seen.
and to be seen. And every time you do that, that little boy who didn't get to make the go-kart and just got to paint it, he's addressed, he's seen, he's healed, he's validated. And that's basically our purpose. It's to feel good about ourselves and heal and not suffer. Our why is really to end suffering in ourselves and, where possible, in others. And that's how we do it. That's how we end the suffering in ourselves, by healing the pain and healing that in others. And it sounds very saintly, and I don't want it to sound, it's not a Mother Teresa statement. It's kind of, it's almost a selfish way of living, but nobly selfish. Does that make sense?
Yes. Sort of the positive side of selfishness.
Yeah, well, it has to be a little bit selfish. I mean, we know self-sacrifice doesn't work. We all end up bitter and resentful, so we don't want to be like that. So let's ditch that and just go, noble selfishness, where we are putting ourselves first and doing what we love. You do what you love, expressing your creativity, and just seeing what happens, and just seeing how you open up to others and others open up to you. Your whole world becomes more fun and more connected. And isn't that what we want at the end of the day? It's more connection by showing up as our real selves, not trying to be someone that we're not.
Well, unfortunately, our time is coming to a close, and we have one last question for you. The Generate Your Value community has one last question we ask every guest. And that question is, what do the words generate your value mean to you? Janet Hogan.
Well, I didn't think I had any value for most of my life. So now what I realize is that we all have a gift. While we stay overshadowed by our shadow, we will deny that we have a gift. We'll say, "Oh, I'm nothing special," and we'll call that modesty. And aren't we humble? But it's not humility. So once we get to this stage of integrating our shadow, that's where we start to see our gift. So that's what I would say is our value, being propelled by that desire to help others, because ultimately we help ourselves. It's a giving loop. Putting our gift out into the world, and then using that to make a difference, solve a problem for others. That's our value. It's our inherent assets, our personal inventory expressed. And in that state, not only do we put it out there, but we also receive. I think our value, expressing our value, must also talk about ability to receive. Because if we can't receive in terms of fulfillment and financial reward, we're going to run out of steam. So expressing our value is a process of giving and receiving, which is quite relevant to what we were just talking about. We must be able to receive. This is note to self, by the way.
Well, we can't thank you enough for coming on to the podcast and sharing your gifts and your process with us. If somebody wanted to reach out and engage with you in some way and for any reason, what's the best way they can reach out to you?
Best way is just to go to my website, janethogan.com. And actually, if you do that, and it's very simple, it's just like a scrolling page, and you go right to the bottom, you'll actually find that exercise that you and I just went through. It's called the inner compass, and it will take you to that first step, the triangle of darkness, and you can try it out for yourself and just see what comes up. What are your core pain points? And that's the first step to starting to work out your why.
And as somebody who went through it, you get presented with a whole bunch of different words describing emotions and so forth, and your job is to, I can't remember if it's 12 or 15 that you start with, and you keep whittling it down till you get to your three, your main three, and then you have to sequence the order from what you feel strongest to weakest out of the three. And that's what forms your triangle.
Yeah, exactly. And from that, when you get to the flip side of that, that's where you get your personal mission statement. So Andy, for you, that's through love and creativity. I am able to receive. I create a world of receiving, because you are creating a world of receiving for yourself and others. And that's your mission statement. Your purpose is to have faith in others, and that's why we're talking today. That's the connection between the spiritual and the self, and that's the glue. That's
the glue in between.
It's the glue in between.
Which was my big aha moment out of our conversation. Was that glue, and how it all fits in for me in my life and my life journey.
Yeah.
So for the listening audience, I hope, as you've heard Zach and I say before, you found some golden nuggets in Janet and I's conversation today that you can integrate into your own life, whether it's your personal life, your business life. That's going to help you grow, help you on your life journey, your hero's journey. And if you haven't already discovered it, your mission, vision, or purpose and why in life. It is your oak tree, as I call it, you're going to hang on to in the good times and the bad times to understand this is why I'm here. And it's, for me, it was a big monkey off my back to understand it about myself and where I was going, and started my journey to find joy and happiness in my life. So we can't thank you enough for taking that valuable resource in your life called time. It's finite. We know you had a choice, and we're glad you made the choice to come listen to this episode. And we hope that you'll have a great day, a great week, and we'll see you next time right here on the Generate Your Value podcast. Take care. Thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of the Generate Your Value podcast. If you find our conversations to be useful in your life, I invite you to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode.
You can find me online at Instagram at _Zach.Levy, Facebook, and LinkedIn.
For information on my coaching services, visit my website at www.generateyourvalue.com. You can also find me and my company on LinkedIn, Facebook, X, and Instagram. Simply search for Generate Your Value on those platforms.
Once again, thanks for joining us for today's podcast, and we invite you to generate your value in this world.